Capital Connection continues now.
Welcome back. Now, if you remember way back in 2021, the state passed new legislative maps, just like it does at the turn of every decade. But this time around, this map especially has faced a lot of legal action, especially at the federal court system. But now there's a different lawsuit midway through this decade being filed by House Republicans at the state Supreme Court. Joining us now is one of the representatives behind that lawsuit, House Republican Ryan Spain. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I just want to start here. Is this a, on a whim lawsuit being filed against the map, or how much work was put into this argument?
Yeah, this lawsuit, which goes straight to the Illinois Supreme Court, was the result of really years of effort, lots of research, a lot of evidence that has been created. Really, for our caucus, it began after the results of the 2022 election. We saw such a strange anomaly in that election. It was the first election under Democrats' new maps. And while we had more votes cast for candidates for the Illinois House as Republicans, Democrats had a 2/3 supermajority in our legislative chamber. So that really is what started this process and caused some alarm that the nature of the maps really need to be considered differently.
Just to go off of that data point there, you showed me the numbers. They are right, but is that a fact of the map? Is that a cause from the map, or is that a cause of maybe there just not being as many competitive races in the already Democrat-controlled districts?
Well, that's another issue too. We need to have more competitive legislative races throughout the entire state. Many races are completely uncontested on both sides of the aisle, and that needs to change. That can change with a more competitive map. But anytime you see an election result with the performance of a certain caucus, in this case for 2022, or maybe a certain candidate, if you look at the performance of Donald Trump in the state of Illinois in 2024, it was quite a bit better than his previous efforts, and frankly, better than we've seen it for a Republican presidential candidate in more than 20 years. And yet there's no corresponding correlation to the legislative outcomes. And that's because of the gerrymandering of the maps, and it's something that's illegal under our state constitution.
So what exactly is the argument about what's wrong with this map? Is it just that, Republicans can't win under these circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to have rigged elections that are unfair because it disenfranchises voters of all parties, not just Republican voters. And that's what we have in Illinois. And specifically because these legislative maps violate our state constitution. The Illinois state constitution includes language that doesn't exist in the U.S. Constitution, specifically that legislative districts must be compact and contiguous. That's in our state constitution. And also that elections must be free and equal. That's in our state constitution. And that's another way to say partisan gerrymandering should not be allowed.
We are in 2025 now. We have 3 elections left for this map cycle, I guess. And I'm just curious what the ideal end outcome is for this lawsuit. What are you asking the court to do with the current map?
Yeah, we wanted to file this lawsuit as quickly as we could this year, now that we've completed the 24 election from last November. Didn't want to be accused of manipulating any of the proceedings during an election cycle. That was something we were greatly frustrated that Democrats did during last year's election cycle, changing the election rules for slating and how candidates can appear on the ballot. They changed those rules in the middle of the election, and that's inappropriate to do. So what we're asking for the Illinois Supreme Court now is to intervene, to respond to the preponderance of evidence that's been presented to them, and invalidate the current legislative map. And then our preferred solution and recommendation to the court is that they would appoint a special master who would oversee the redrawing of legislative districts that would actually be in compliance with our Constitution.
So let's say the court does rule that this map does not meet the standards laid out in the Constitution, but they don't have that special person there to draw the new map and to make it that independent party to draw the map. It just goes back to the legislature, correct? And then we're kind of back to square one with the whole situation, with another map to be drawn in 4 years. I'm just curious if there's a longer standing precedent you're also seeking when it comes to map making in Illinois, or if this is solely focused on that 2021 map.
Sure, I do think it's both things. And so the court will need to determine what remedy it requires. We believe a special master would be far preferable than sending maps once again for a third try back to the legislature, back to politicians. Politicians shouldn't be choosing who their voters are. We need to have some independence in that process. That's what got us into this problem in the first place. So I hope that the court would select a remedy that would be better than going back to the legislature. But your point is exactly right for the future. We've got to change the way we draw legislative districts in the state of Illinois. Many, many states have done this and are moving forward to have independence in how they draw legislative districts. So we should not arrive at a moment in time after the 2030 census and be right back in the same situation where politicians are selecting their voters.
When we go off that idea of politicians selecting voters, what is it about the current districts that you've found, that you've put together to make this argument? How is it that they are gerrymandered, like you're arguing?
Sure, I've called it very sinister gerrymandering. It's some of the most egregious violations and use of terrible gerrymandering tactics anywhere in the country. That's why we have the most non-compact legislative map than anywhere in the country. And the Supreme Court has already ruled on the topic of compactness. That's why we feel very strong that they will take up this case. They've invalidated a legislative district in the past that was ruled to be non-compact. Now we know that we have 52 legislative districts less compact than what the court has already overturned. So compactness is a problem, and just the way that for partisan political purposes, groups of voters have been manipulated from one geographic area to another without really any respect to communities of interest, municipal boundaries and things like that.
Just to be clear, that past ruling on compactness, that was years ago. That wasn't the current iteration of this court.
Yeah, but that is the only time our Supreme Court has taken up the issue of compactness, and they established a threshold for what it means to have a district that is not compact. And we're able to quantify and put a statistical score to every single legislative district. And this came up on the floor debate when we were debating the passage of the map that is the law of the land right now in Illinois. And I asked the legislative sponsor to tell us about compactness measurements for the legislative maps. She was unable to do so because the maps are so egregiously non-compact that we've quantified it through statistics and outside experts to just show we're in a far worse spot. A point of being so egregious, someone has to finally make a stand and say, we're not going to accept this and continue doing the same thing again and again every 10 years.
So I'm interested if you hear from constituents about this issue. Oftentimes when we talk about the legislative maps, I remember back in 2021, the conversation about how the districts were drawn got so intricate and everything that it's a process that may be incredibly difficult for the public, the general public, to be following along with the entire time. Is this something that you think people in Illinois are really aware of, that they may be getting pushed around to these districts, or the districts, while they might not know the exact science behind it, were drawn in this certain way for this certain reason?
I think there's probably an understanding that there's some amount of corruption. This is Illinois. We're very familiar with it, and how decisions are made for the sake of achieving and holding on to power. That's why legislative districts were drawn the way they are in Illinois. I think that many constituents understand that. I think we've seen actions and panels of juries in federal court weighing in on those types of decisions. So, and certainly constituents look at a map and try and figure out who represents them here in Springfield, and they're very confused by it because you could have small towns that are cut in half or into thirds, and there's no logical explanation for why that would be. The only explanation is that the Constitution was violated deliberately so that power could be maintained by one political party.
Well, Representative Ryan Spain, thank you so much for joining us. We're definitely going to be following along with that lawsuit.
Thanks.